Research shows that stereotypes may have self-fulfilling effects. This means that an individual who is stereotyped by others may demonstrate the stereotypical behavior that confirms the stereotype, not because the individual possessed that personality, but because others treated the person with negative bias based on the stereotype. This way, stereotypes can generate stereotypical behavior and bolster itself. Research by Mark Snyder, Ellen Bursheen, and Elizabeth Decker-Tank showed that this self-fulfilling nature of stereotype did indeed exist. The research demonstrated that the physical attractiveness of stereotype may create its own social reality through the self-fulfilling mechanism shown previously. This stereotype, known as "what is beautiful is good" effect, describes the phenomenon where people think physically attractive persons also possess virtuous inner qualities and characters. 51 male and 51 female undergraduates at University of Minnesota participated in the research. They were told that the study was to study the process by which people became acquainted with each other. Half of the male participant in the experiment room was given the stimulus photo of physically attractive female, and half were given unattractive stimulus photo. They each filled out impression formation questionnaire, recording what their first impression of the girl was. Then, each of the male participants engaged in a 10-minute phone call with a female participant sitting in another experiment room. The female participants they were interacting with was not the person in the photo, but the male participant was told that he was talking to the person in the photo. The female participant did not know the existence of the photo. The conversation was recorded. Tape recordings of each participant's conversation was analyzed by observer judges who did not know anything about the experiment hypothesis or actual perceived attractiveness of the individuals in the conversation. One group of observer judges only heard the voice of women targets and rated each woman on impression formation questionnaire. Second group of observer judges performed a similar assessment on male perceivers. The impression formation questionnaire that male perceiver answered after they saw the stimulus bogus photo but before talking to the actual woman revealed that men who saw the physically attractive photo expected to have phone call with someone who was more sociable, poised, humorous, and socially adept. The group of men who saw the physically unattractive photo expected to talk with someone who was more unsociable, awkward, serious, and inept. This result suggests that the "what is beautiful is good" effect existed among the perceiver males. Further analysis showed that observer judges who only heard woman's voice in the tape viewed the woman who had been assigned to the attractive target condition, who was perceived as attractive by male, quite differently than the woman in the unattractive target condition, who was perceived as unattractive by male. For example, male perceivers with attractive female photos expected to have phone call with someone who was more sociable, and male who got the physically unattractive photo expected to talk with someone who was less sociable. In reality, those photos are not the real photos of their partner they talked with, and the female partners did not know about the photo, so their prediction of the female partner's character should be wrong. However, interestingly, the observer judges who did not know perceived or actual attractiveness formed an impression that matched the male perceiver's impression. This means that the attractiveness of Vogel's photo given to the male perceivers actually impacted the female participants' conversation behavior in a way that confirmed the male's erroneous stereotype. How did this happen? The mediator of this relationship was found to be the behavior of male participants. The analysis on the observer judge's impression on participants' voices in the tape revealed that men who interacted with women they believed to be physically attractive appeared to the observer judges that they were more sexually warm, sociable, interesting, outgoing, humorous than their counterparts in unattractive conditions. Differences in how male perceivers treated the targets have been the key factor eliciting the stereotypical behaviors from females. However, people often ignore this effect caused by self-fulfilling nature of stereotype and attribute the stereotype-confirming behavior to the target's intrinsic dispositional property, even when they are aware that the target's actions are influenced largely by the environment. Madon and her colleagues' series of 3 experiments on self-fulfilling nature of sex stereotype showed this phenomenon. In the first experiment, 3 groups of participants were given 3 different types of profile. Jessica, who has stereotypical female hobbies, Jess, who has gender-neutral hobbies, and Michael, who has stereotypical male hobbies. Then the participants were told to choose 6 newspaper articles and magazines for the person in the profile to read. The result indicated that perceivers gave significantly more stereotypically feminine magazines and articles such as cosmetics and beauty to Jessica, and significantly more male magazines such as cars and sports to Michael. The next experiment they conducted were based on the result of first experiment. To keep it simple, experimenters gave the 6 set of articles that the perceivers chose to each individuals in the target group and told them to choose 3 articles from the 6 given ones. As expected, those who were given the 6 articles that were intended for Jessica significantly chose more stereotypically feminine magazines than compared to those who were given the set of 6 articles originally intended for Michael, regardless of whether the participants were really female or male. This is obvious since the former group who were given the magazines intended for Jessica simply had more choice of feminine magazines in front of them to choose from. It was simple probability. This again shows the self-fulfilling nature of stereotypes. However, the result of last experiment was surprising. The experimenters told another group of participants that the target participants in the previous experiment had to choose 3 articles from the 6 they were given. They were also shown the initial pool of 6 articles that their target were given, which were originally intended for Jessica and predominated by stereotypically feminine article. Then, they showed the 3 articles that participants in the previous experiment chose, which was also predominantly feminine due to the self-fulfilling effect. However, even when the participants in the last experiment was aware that the participants in the previous experiment had restrictive and biased pool of articles to choose from, when they saw that the 3 articles chose were predominantly feminine, they formed stereotypes on them. They thought, based on the participants' article choice, that the participants were suitable for some careers like cosmetic salesperson and English teacher, while unsuitable for some careers such as mechanics and science teacher. The result shows that stereotypes' self-fulfilling effect can have ripple effects that influence the way new perceivers judge a target. Furthermore, perceivers' awareness that a target's behavior was shaped by other stereotypes did not reduce this ripple effect. This is due to the common cognitive error fundamental attribution error. Fundamental attribution error is a phenomena where we often attribute much of the causes of targets' behavior on their underlying disposition rather than situational factor. For example, we are more likely to think that our friend is late to the party because he's not promptly or lazy, rather than thinking that something must have happened on the way to the party. So, new perceivers who observe a target behave in a stereotypic way may misattribute the behavior to an underlying disposition when it was actually caused by a stereotype's self-fulfilling effect. Such a tendency might occur even among perceivers who are aware that prior perceivers encouraged the target's stereotypic behavior, as the last experiment shows. But because of the self-fulfilling and self-reinforcing nature of stereotype, it is a common debate whether a given stereotype has emerged from pre-existing social reality via observation by many people, or has shaped social reality over time to resemble the stereotype via discrimination. Some scholars argue that stereotypes form as accurate reflections of social reality. Oakes et al. 1994 asserted that stereotyping is psychologically rational, valid, and reasonable, and it provides vertical social perception. However, other scholars argue that stereotypes form as inaccurate reflections of social reality because of cognitive and motivational biases. One example, system justification theory, posits that people are motivated to perceive the status quo as fair and legitimate. Kay and colleagues 2009 noted that motivation to view what is as what it should be may lead to the creation of stereotypes that, in effect, legitimize reality, however unfair reality may be. Liu and colleagues give an example using racial stereotypes. The stereotype that blacks are less competent, intelligent, and hardworking than whites was posited to have emerged partly as an ideological justification for the socioeconomic gap between the two groups. We cannot know whether all stereotypes are inaccurate reflections of social reality. However, this research by Liu and his colleagues proved that stereotypes can indeed be formed without pre-existing social reality and then produce social realities such as discrimination and resulting statistics. Not too long ago, the Western astrological science and its myth about how it influences one's personality was introduced to Chinese popular culture. However, during the process of translation into Chinese and its emergence into Chinese traditional culture, astrological stereotypes were exogenously imposed onto astrological science. Because these astrological stereotypes were not based on any pre-existing social reality in China to begin with, as the history of it in China is very short, and as it is based on translation of the words, not on the observations of actual people's personalities, they enabled the scholars to address the question of whether stereotypes that were not initially formed based on social reality can shape social reality. Western astrological science were introduced into China and translated into Chinese names, largely semantically, rather than phonetically. The semantic translations carried particular cultural meanings shared among the Chinese and caused stereotypes to be projected onto astrological science. For example, Virgo, translated in Chinese as Virgin Lady, are stereotyped as having disagreeable personalities, because in China the word old virgin is used to describe spinsters who are critical, fussy, and picky about men. Thus, Chinese stereotype Virgo personality as disagreeable with synonyms of critical and germophobic. Research in large number of Chinese confirmed that these stereotypes exist. The researchers conducted a study using an interesting fact that there are two Chinese translations of Virgo. Whereas Virgin is the well-known translation in astrology, Royal Chamber Lady is the lesser-known translation in astronomy. The translation Royal Chamber Lady conveys a more agreeable images than the word Virgin in China. As a result, diverse Chinese participants in the study perceived the person with astrological sign Virgos as more agreeable when translated as Royal Chamber Lady, and perceived the same person with the same sign as more disagreeable when translated as Virgin. However, further research shows that Chinese people discriminated the Virgo type on the dating app, regardless of the fact that it did not reflect personality at all. An HR manager discriminated the type of astrological sign as a job candidate. Therefore, this research shows that stereotype without any social reality ground can cause discrimination and thus create new social. Like this, numerous experiments and studies show that stereotypes have self-fulfilling nature of self, and that we can often ignore this effect. Also, although we cannot know whether all stereotypes are an accurate reflection of the reality, research still shows that groundless stereotypes can indeed be formed and can shape the social reality in a discriminative way.